Okay, so we're on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph in the third parak of Bava Metzia Mafkid. We're on the second Mishnah of that daf. We finished the first Mishnah and that sugya, which had to do with giving money to a shulchani, to a money changer, and what the conditions are for when the money changer is chayev, or using the money or not using the money. So that was a very interesting discussion. Now, further on, the next Mishnah is a little bit more intricate, actually, and also very, very fascinating. So we'll start with the Mishnah. It's about a little bit past the halfway part of the page, maybe a little closer to 2/3. Hashalech yad bipikadon. So this Mishnah deals with the following circumstance. Someone gives a pikadon, an item to be watched, to an individual who then takes it and uses it. In other words, it's supposed to be a pikadon. It's supposed to be something that he holds for the as a custodian, and he takes it, basically takes it for himself. And then it becomes destroyed. Either it becomes destroyed or he destroys it. We'll see how the Mishnah gives us options. So this falls into the category of what we said several weeks ago. We talked about a nafkamina between gezela, stealing, what we call gezela, and shlichus yad. Shlichus yad means, for lack of a better definition, we call it misappropriation, but shlichus yad is a form of gezela. But how it's nuanced is really what the issue is. So we know that if someone steals an object, and the halacha generally is from the Mishnah Bava Kama, that if you take something from someone else and you return it as it is, intact, the way it is, then there's no other issues of punishment or chiyuv or anything, because you return the item intact. Where does the shaila come up? The question comes up if the item is destroyed or the item is no longer available to be returned. Now we are into a more nuanced discussion of what is it he's returning to him. He's returning money. So now when it returns money, now we have a issue of, well, what's the value of the object when you stole it, either when you stole it or destroyed it? Again, differences of view in the Mishnah, because if you give the item back, it is what it is. But what happens if the item increases in value or decreases in value while you have it? So if you give the item back, there's no shaila because you're giving the item back. But if you don't give the item back because the item is no longer here, then we start asking questions about what should he give back monetarily? The value of the item, the increased value of the item, the decreased value, because the item changed in value. So that becomes the subject of the Mishnah, and it's complicated because it's not the same as just giving back the chayfetz. You stole something, you return it. You stole something, it's gone, now what do you do? So that is the tenor of how this Mishnah is going to go, and that's and we'll see how complicated that becomes. So hashalech yad bipikadon, if someone takes the pikadon, and we're assuming here that he can't return the pikadon because it's no longer here, then says the Mishnah, Beishamai Omrim, Beishamai says Yilokach v'choser v'yeser, that you return either the lesser amount or the greater amount, again assuming a change in value in the chayfetz. So then you return whatever that chayfetz's value is, because you don't have the chayfetz, you don't have the object. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We'll get into a much deeper discussion of what that means. Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel disputes Beis Shammai, and he says that you return the value b'shas hotza'ah. Now, what does that mean? So b'shas hotza'ah means at the time of its removal. What does that mean at the time of its removal? Again, the word hotza'ah is too general for us to really understand what it is in the Mishnah. At the time that it was removed. Removed from what? So again, we don't know. In fact, Rashi says, take a look here. Okay, but we'll say Rashi in a minute. And then you have the third view. The third view is Rabbi Akiva is B'shas HaTvia, that you return at the time the claim is made, meaning either you go before Beis Din or when there's an actual sort of trial or litigation or something, whatever the value is at that point, which is later on, it could have gone up, it could have gone down. So we have different views on what he has to return if he doesn't have the chayfetz. The chayfetz, no question, you return the item. It doesn't matter if the item went up or down. You're returning the actual item. You can't argue with that. What we find difficulty is if you don't have the item and it's changed value, what should this sort of ganef, this gazlan, what should he be returning? And it's not so simple to say, oh, he should return the highest amount. That's not so simple. So we have to delve into this Mishnah very deeply to understand. Yeah, Jay.
Is there an option here from the beginning of the story that he says, look, I like this thing, I want to buy it from you right away? Is that going to be covered as one of the options rather than returning or paying the value?
Not in this Mishnah, but that's a very good point, because if he says, I want to buy it, obviously the owner has to be willing to sell it. And if he does, of course, they can negotiate a price, but he can't of his own say, I'm buying it and paying you whether you like it or not. That obviously doesn't fly. So this Mishnah does not concern itself where the shomer, if you will, of the Pikadon says, I want to buy it. Clearly, if he wants to buy it, then they negotiate a price, either the value of what it is now or what it was, or if it's an appreciable item, then the owner will certainly want some more money. But no, the short answer is, Jay, that we don't concern ourselves now with that question. We're only concerned with the question of the return of the item. And if you can't return the item, what's its monetary value? That's really what this Mishnah is about, is how do we assess the monetary value of an item when it's in a fluctuating market?
Right, but the Beis Din doesn't say, look, you have another choice, go buy it from him. In other words, they could have added in a third option, almost direct the shomer to say, now that you caused all of these problems, we're forcing you to buy it.
Yeah, well, the Beis Din doesn't want to interject itself with suggestions, but if in the course of discussion in front of the Beis Din said that, then of course the parties can look at each other and say, hey, that's not a bad idea. But that's not the point here. What this Mishnah, what these Tanoim want to extrapolate from our Mishnah is how one approaches values when the item has been either stolen or is no longer here. So we can't just say return the item. Remember, returning the item takes away all issues, because if it went up, down, sideways, it doesn't matter. The item is here. Take your item back and finish. It's only when the item's not here and situations and value that this Mishnah wants to educate us as to how you approach that. If there's another suggestion, like you say, go buy it again, then you have to negotiate a price. Well, the price was $5 then, it's $7 now, or whatever it happens to be. But basically, let's just put that off the table. Let's just say that this Mishnah is focused, the Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, is how we reach a valuation for an item that is no longer here, and it's time to pay back the item. So
Rabbi, why is it being so lenient on the person? It's theft what he's done. He's taken something that wasn't his. It's cut and dry. He stole it. That's all there is to it.
Well, you would think that, you would think that. But remember, we have this whole discussion about shlichus yad. So this guy is a shomer. So he was a shomer, and then he took the item. So
he sold it.
Yeah. So you would say, oh, but he stole the item. That's the end of it, and finished. But it's not that simple, because if he took the item, and he has the opportunity of returning it, then it's no longer stolen. B, you'll see from how the Gemara interprets what he stole, that I wish it was David, as simple as what you just say. He stole it, and that's the end of it. When you see the options the Gemara gives us for what happened with the item, you'll begin to see that this is not a cut and dried situation. Okay, so let's hold off your question, which is a good one, but because the Gemara wants to give us options in this fact pattern so that we can understand, maybe under one set of circumstances, this is the halacha, and under another set of circumstances, that's the halacha. Not like, he stole it, that's the end of it, let him pay. You think it's that simple. Unfortunately, it's not. And the Gemara will explain why not. But you're right.
To extrapolate what Jay said then, well, if he wanted to buy it and if there was no response, yes or no, and then he sold it, well, that's that's a deliberate theft right there.
Right, but
He's keeping the money for himself. He's not giving it to the owner.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there is no hint of a sale here. Let's just take that off the table for the moment. That this Gemara's discussion does not go in that direction. Clearly, if it went in that direction, it would solve probably a lot of problems because they negotiate a price. But what's happening here is the guy wants his chaypitz back, and the person who was entrusted with it doesn't have it. And the Gemara wants to show us how you approach. Again, this is illustrative of how the Mishnah works. I mean, at that point in time, what's the halacha? What do you do when he misappropriated it and he did either A, B, or C? He did something to it, and that's the point I'm trying to make: is that what he did to it influences the outcome, not just, oh, he took it, he has to pay. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have this whole Gemara. The reason why we have this whole Gemara is because, as you will see in a minute, depending on what he did when he misappropriated it, that's where the Mishnah comes down and says, well, if you did this, this is what you got to do. If you did this, this is what you got to do. Contrary maybe to your thinking, what are you talking about? He took it, he should pay, which is the natural inclination. So let's hold off a second, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But let's look at Rashi, because Rashi says, "V'lokach b'cheser v'yeser." This is Beis Shammai. Im chasru demeo, so huzla b'shuk. Okay, he gave him an item that was worth $100, but the value of that item decreased. It's now worth 90. Yishalem demeo k'mo shehoyse shava b'shas sheshalach boyad. Then he, according to if it went down in price, then Beis Shammai say he at least has to give him what it was worth when he stole it. So if it's now worth 90 and he stole it and it was worth 100, then, and it's no longer here, he has to give him the 100 of what he stole, because he stole an item worth 100. So that's what Rashi says, b'chaser. If it went down in price, at least give him what the value of the item was. Now, and then he says, generally, as that Gemara in Bava Metzia had said, a gazlan pays the value of the item at the time of the theft. Don't you and it's not in front of us. If it was intact in front of us, as we had said before, then it's exactly what we said. Here it is. We don't have to worry about what it's worth. I'm giving you the item back, right? Truma, which is what that Gemara is talking about. So if you have the item, perfect. Give him the item. Doesn't matter whether it went up and down. But if it went down in value, then you have to give him, says Rashi, the value of what it was when you stole it. Now, ubi yeser. What does it mean if it's increased? If it increased in value, says Rashi. Im shasa biyadav mishishalach voyad b'nisyakra. It appreciated. Then he has to give him the increased price. So if it went up from 100 to 110, and then that's what he has to give him. So Beis Shammai clearly says that we're always going to look to the advantage of the owner of the item. He can get no less than it was worth when he gave it to him, but it can be worth more if it appreciated. So if it depreciated, we discount that. He's got to give him what it was worth. And if it appreciated, he gives him the appreciated price. So that's how Beis Shammai looks at this. Again, a lot of complications, but that's how, in principle, Beis Shammai looks at it. Beis Hillel says, what does it Beis Hillel say? Bishas said, so it says Rashi, the Gemara Mefarish. Mishnah doesn't want to touch that. That'll be discussed in the Gemara, what the word Hotsa'ah means at the time it was removed. Removed from what, from whom, from where? Let's wait. Okay? And the third part was Rabbi Akiva, Bishas Atviyah, is Bishashi Atviyah Ladin. When you come in front of Bezdin, and also Ubi Gemara Mefarish Tama, the Gemara will explain what does it mean at the time of it makes the claim. I mean, is it possible that when he made the claim, it depreciated in price, he has to pay less? Could that be what the Gemara is saying? In other words, it's possible that you stole something and it went down in price, and now you're in front of Bezdin, now you're going to want to pay less than it was actually worth. We don't know that, but the time to look at it is not the time of the theft, but the time when it's actually being actively litigated as to what amount he has to repay it. Okay, so those are the three views, and now the Gemara is going to get into starting with the first view. And again, we're going to have to focus very heavily here because there are a lot of nuances to this whole discussion. Omer Rabbah comes along, Rabbah and Amora, and he wants to now understand what this Mishnah is talking about. So listen, this is the example that will make all these points that we're talking about. Haiman de Gozel Chavisa de Chamra Mechabre. A person stole a regular gazel. A person stole a barrel of wine from his friend. Miikara Shavia Zuzah. When he stole it, the barrel of wine was worth 1 zuz. Now, fast forward, Hashta Shavia Arba. Now, and it's increased in price. The wine is appreciated in price. And now, as the story unfolds, it's now worth 4 zuz. A week later, let's just say. Okay, now, here are the options. Tavra Oshasiya. If he actively took the barrel and he cracked it over a rock and destroyed the barrel, or he drank the wine that was in the barrel. So he was proactive in doing something, right? He was proactive in doing something. Says the Gemara, Mishalem Arba. Then he has to pay 4. Okay, it was worth 1. He actively did something to destroy the barrel, the wine, and the barrel's broken, the wine's no longer here. Mishalem Arba, he has to pay 4 zuz. Now, listen to this. Itbar Memela, he didn't do anything. The barrel fell apart. We don't know why. Maybe the wine fermented and exploded. Maybe something else happened, but he didn't lay a hand on it. It was passive. All of a sudden, and you can conjure up any thought, but the wine barrel destroyed. Says the Gemara, Mishalem Zuzah, pays only a zuz. It's worth 4 now. He stole it, but he didn't actively destroy the barrel. He just has the barrel. And the Gemara says, Mishalem Zuzah. He pays only a zuz. So this is the Gemara. Now you can say to yourself, this is really strange. I mean, remember, we started talking about options, and I said, wait to see how the Gemara presents this case. It's not just he stole it and it's not here. He stole it, and now we see that depending on what he did after he stole it, that influences the value of the barrel, of what he has to pay. So the chayra that, I mean, you can ask really why, but okay, the Gemara is going to ask. Okay, that says the Gemara, my Tama. So Rabbah now is going to explain to us his thinking. Why in the first part where he actively does something, he pays the 4, and why in the second part of his thought, he pays only a zuz. My Tama. Okay, so now says the Gemara Salih. What's the reason he has to pay 4? Kiva di Isa. If the barrel was in front of us intact, Hadra Lamara Be'ena, he would have given it right back, and he would have the value would have not mattered because he would have given him the barrel. So he shata de koshosale, the moment he drank it, he opened the barrel and drank it. Oh, de kotoverle, or he destroyed it. The moment he did the action that he did, kogozlamine, that's the minute of gezela. So listen to this. He took a barrel, the barrel's in his rishus and did nothing with it. Says inherently the Gemara is saying he hasn't stolen it yet. He's moved it from the owner to himself, but that's not considered gezela. He just moved it. Okay? Or he was a shomer and he was entrusted with it and he has it in his possession. In his possession, it's not gezela. He has it. Now he goes ahead and does an act of drinking or breaking the item. The moment he does that act, that's the moment of gezela. Okay? Very precisely. That's the moment of gezela. And Utanan, and we learned in the Mishnah, and this is the Mishnah in Bava Kama, that is the source of all of this. What does that Mishnah say? Kol hagazlonim mishalnim b'shas hagzela. Every gazlan has to repay the item that he stole at the time he stole it. When did he steal it? Not when it was in his possession, just sitting there worth a zuz. He stole it when he drank it or broke it when it's worth 4 zuz. So b'shas hagzela, according to Rabbah, is when the act was committed. That's why Rabbah says if he was proactive and he broke the barrel, or he drank the wine from the barrel, he pays 4 zuz, because that's the instant of gezela, and the Mishnah says kol hagazlonim mishlom b'shas hagzela.
Rabbi,
Okay,
can I
that
ask
makes sense.
Is this a shomer chinam or shomer sacher?
Shomer chinam.
Rabbi,
Sure.
can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
If he asks, if the one who gave it to him to watch asks for it back,
Yes.
does that change the context of, so he hasn't done nothing actively,
Right.
but he's been asked to return it and he doesn't return it at
Right.
the time that it's supposed to be returned, since he's a shomer chinam, and let's say the agreement is you return it whenever I ask you to return it. Does that change the character of this?
That's a very, very good question. Because what you're saying, what you're asking is, before anything happens, do we already have what supposedly is a return of the item? So in principle, the answer is yes. The answer would be yes, that he should return it to him at the time that he asks for it. But obviously, that would be too simple. He didn't return it, right? And then these actions happen, right? Because that's how we have to look at it. If he returns it to him, no problem.
Right, there's no problem.
No
Right.
problem. So, but he didn't return it to him. Your question is there gezela at that point in time?
Right, exactly.
And the Mishnah and the Gemara is inherent as there is not gezela, because there was no, even though he is a shomer and he should return it to him, but since there was no shlichus yad, meaning that it was something that was in flux. Let's call it in flux. If he said to him, return it to me, and the fellow said, I'm not returning it to you, okay, fine, okay, then I could say, yeah, I'm going to go to Bezdin and I'm going to get it back. And at that point in time, what's it worth? 1 zuz. It was worth 1 zuz. Fine. So he has to give him the item back, or he has to give him back 1 zuz. What happens if he asks for it back and it has increased to 4 zuz, right? That's the subject of our Mishnah. If it was increased to 4, doesn't want to give it back, then he has to pay him the 4 zuz, because there he stole it. But that's a classic case of Gezela. There's no nuance in that. I give something to you, you say, forget about it, I'm keeping it. It's now worth whatever it's worth. Then kol hagezlonim mishalem b'shas gzela. What's b'shas gzela? In that case, it's when I ask you to give it back to me. You didn't give it back to me. Now you got to pay for it. So your point, which is different from the Gemara, Michael, is you're correct. At that point, he has to pay him the 4 zuz. But that's not what happened in the Mishnah. What happened in the Mishnah is he didn't ask it back. This fellow went ahead and misappropriated it, and he said, you know what? I want to drink from this wine. And he started drinking from the wine, and he drained the barrel. Now we have a problem because he can't give him back a barrel of wine. So it says the Gemara, if it was worth a zuz, you have to pay him a zuz. But what happens if this wine appreciated, it became more expensive, whatever? Then he has to give him back the demei hagzela at the time of the gzela. But the gzela was only when he drank it, because unlike your case where he asked for it, he never asked for it. But you're right. If he asked for it, that's where the cutoff is for gzela. When he
Thank
asked
you,
for
Rabbi.
it. Yeah. Okay, good. So now we have a situation where says Rabbah that because he stole it, and at the time of the theft it was worth 4 zuz, he has to pay him 4 zuz. That's pretty straightforward. Rabbah makes a good case, and we understand that. Okay, now, what about where he wasn't proactive, and something happened to the barrel by itself? It exploded, or again, maybe it rolled off the table, and he was a Shem Mechinam, and he didn't steal it, or whatever. So what do you do in that particular case? So says the Gemara, Isaba Memela Mishalem Zuzah. If it happened by itself, then he pays only 1 zuz. Says the Gemara, my tama. Why does he pay only 1 zuz? So the Gemara internally asks the following question: The barrel's just sitting there on the table, and then all of a sudden something happens. Again, let's just say that internal combustion. Okay, but nothing that he did, right? So the Gemara is asking a Havamina that he shouldn't have to pay anything because he didn't do anything. He had the barrel in his possession, and the barrel exploded, not because of anything he did. So why should he pay anything? Why should he be mechayev to pay anything when the barrel exploded? What's the principle that he should be paying? So, and for the Gemara, you know what? Ahi shata de gezela. The moment, remember, what happened was he actually misappropriated. He internally in the fact pattern, he took the keg and he moved it to his side of the table. He wasn't returning it. He was not returning it. Your example, Michael, he wasn't returning it, but he didn't do anything to it. Says the Gemara that ahi shata zuzuhu deshavet, that since the Mishnah in Bava Kama says that a Gazlan has to pay at the time of the Gezela, and for better or for worse, he's a Gazlan because he doesn't want to return it. He's been asked to return it and he doesn't want to return it. Then he has to pay what it's worth at the time of the Gezela. What's it worth at the time of the Gezela? 1 zuz. He didn't do anything to it. It was broken of its own accord, and therefore, in that particular case, he only has to pay 1 zuz because that's all it was worth. So what's Rabbah telling us? Rabbah is telling us that there are 2 ways that this person can be chayiv. He can be chayiv, quote unquote, if it increased in price. When did it increase in price? When he drank it or broke it. Or he can be chayiv when nothing happened to the barrel. He didn't increase it in price, or even may have decreased in price. and he's chayiv to return just the barrel. What does Rabba's position sound like? Beis Shammai. Because Beis Shammai says in the Mishnah that if a person converts it, then he actually is chayiv in gezela at the time of the conversion. Then he has to pay b'yeser, the increased price. But if it went down in price and he did nothing, he has to pay at least the value of what it was. You can't pay less. According to Beis Shammai, a Goslin can never pay less than the value of what he got. That would be just not fair or not right. So we don't punish him by saying he's got to pay anything other than at least the value of the gezela. So it sounds very strangely that Rabbah is saying what the Beis Shammai is saying. Gemara will talk about that in a minute, but I'm just sounding it out that the example that Rabbah gives in the Gemara coincides with what Beis Shammai is saying in the Mishnah. It goes up in price, i.e., he drank it, as an example, or he broke it. You got to pay the higher price. It went down in price, but he did nothing. Then you don't pay the lesser amount. You pay at least the amount that it was at the time of the gezela. So that's Rabbah. So that's Rabbah's position. And okay, so now that makes it makes sense that that's what Beis Shammai is wanting to say. Okay, fine. So let's leave Beis Shammai for the moment, and look at Rashi. Mi'ikara. So he says Mi'ikara kishigazula. In the beginning, when he stole it, ulubesov kishiyotza min ha'olam. In other words, the beginning and the end. The beginning is when he stole it. Lebesov means kishiyotza min ha'olam, when it actually went from the world, meaning it was broken. Okay, so again, those are definitions which we'll keep in mind as we go forward. Tavra, he broke it the Yadayim, says Rashi, or Shisia Achashahukra, or he drank it after it. In other words, the wine already appreciated in price because it was vintage, and then he drank it, right? So under those circumstances, you have to pay the higher amount. Okay, so this is Beis Shammai. Now, let's turn to Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel, the Mishnah gave us no explanation, because Beis Hillel says that he pays b'shas haitzah at the time of haitzah. Haitzah means the time it goes out, it leaves, but that's a very vague term. Leaves who and what? What does it mean? Says the Gemara as follows. Beis Hillel omen b'shas haitzah. Correct the Gemara 4 lines from the bottom. Ma kishas haitzah. What does it mean at the time that it leaves at haitzah, that it goes out? What does it mean? Ilema b'shas haitzah min ha'olam. If you say that what we're saying haitzah means it leaves the world, meaning the chavius is broken. Once the chavius, the barrel of wine is broken, using the same example, the barrel of wine is broken, then quote unquote, it leaves the world. It's no longer intact as a barrel of wine, if that's what you mean, right? Ubamai. Now, okay, so I'll accept it. But we're talking about a case where the barrel broke, and what happened? If it decreased in value, the Ikalamanda Amar, is there a Manda Amar who's going to say that you stole a barrel, it decreased in value, and now pay him the lower amount? That's ridiculous. No one would say that. That's on nobody's radar. That a ganef or a goslin should wind up paying less than what he stole, because we have a Mishnah that says Gaslina Masha Gozla, Bishas Masha Gozla. So he can't be paying less under any circumstance.
He's still getting a great deal.
Yeah, it's a great deal, right? He steals it.
Five-finger discount, yeah.
Five-finger discount. So the Gemara is saying inherently that can't be what Beis Hillel means when he says B'shas haitzah, because that there's just equity here. It's not fair that he should steal it, be chayiv for the theft, but he doesn't have to pay him the value of the item. So it can't mean chosr. Okay. B'shas haitzah, ma b'shas haitzah. Ilan b'shas haitzah min ha'olam Is there a mandama who said that you pay less for Hotanan because of that Mishnah in Bava Kama that you pay b'shas Zela? The EBSer, and if it increased in price at the time he stole it, Hanu Beis Shammai. Then that's the Beis Shammai that he has to pay 4 zuz. So the Gemara's kasha is Beis Hillel is saying something that should be in dispute of Beis Shammai. What's he disputing? By saying B'shas Eitzah, we're analyzing his words, and he's saying the same thing as Beis Shammai. Either you pay the value of at the time of the theft, or you pay the increase in value. So what's the chiddush? We're trying to find something in Beis Hillel that's different than Beis Shammai, and we're not finding it. Because if you break down Beis Hillel, he's either paying the value at the time of the theft, because you can't pay less, or he's paying the increased amount if at the time of Hoitzah, meaning at the time it broke or was no longer a barrel and you can't return the barrel. Remember, returning the barrel is the optimum way of returning the gazela. You just return the barrel, we don't care what it's worth, we're giving it back to you. But if we can't give it back to you because it's broken, and you have to give him the increased value, then what's Beis Hillel being mechadish over Beis Shammai? He's saying the same thing. So says Rashi, the Isa, so let's go to Rashi. The Isa tam b'shas hatvia hava, at the time of the taking, mahadrina be'ena, the chiyomina mishalim b'shas hagzela, hecha delesa, boyin, aval yeshno ba'ayin, if it's in front of us, ben shehukla, ben shehuzla, hozeres, kemo shehi. Okay, again, Rashi is repeating what we've said a number of times, that no harm, no foul. Here it is, I'm giving it back. If the Tuvia was the Tuvia, the request, give it back to me, was at the time that it was still around, after it increased in price, he returns it the way it is. The Hoshata de Koroshoyle have it a gazelle, because there was no gazela until he actually drank it. Ubamai, a high pligi Beis Hillel. What is Beis Hillel arguing on Beis Shammai? Iber Chaser Kishahuzla, when it went down in price to come to Beis Shammai, Yilka L'Shalem Kedamim Shahoisa B'Shas Exela, that he has to repay him what it was at the time of Exela. But come to Beis Hillel B'Shas Eitzah, the same thing. So he's not being mechadish anything, right? When it goes down in price, it's a question. Don't they pay at least the value of what it was at the time of the Gazela? Of course they do. So how are we going to distinguish between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel if Beis Hillel is winding up to say the same thing as Beis Shammai, right? Okay, so now let's turn to Mem Gimel on the Beis on the top. Therefore, we have to redefine Beis Hillel. We're saying that Beis Hillel means B'shas Eitzah at the time that it broke. Elo Pshita says the Gemara B'shas Eitzah mebeis Balim. It doesn't mean that you Hotzah at the time it broke. No, it's when it left the hands of the owner. Meaning, we have a new definition that the valuation of the item is when it left the owner's chazaka, the owner's ownership, his possession, right? And not when it was drunk or later on. All right. So now that's a whole different thing. Why? Because let's analyze this. If we're talking about Rashi, Elipshita b'shas Eitzah mebeis Balim, Kishas hakizela ubeyeser pligi. We're talking only when it increased in value, not decreased, because decreased where we have no dispute. So it increased in value the moment it left the hands of the owner. The Kame Beis Shammai im hukra yilaka l'shalem b'shas Eitzah min ha'olam Beis Hillel ome kishas Eitzah mebeis habalim. So now the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is, what's the valuation? Is it the valuation when it left the hands of the owner, like Beis Hillel, or is it the value of the property when it left the world, meaning when it was broken? Now we have a real machlokes, Because what happens if when he left the hands of the owner, it's worth a zuz, and then later on it's worth 4, and he drank it when it was worth 4. Beis Shammai says you pay 4, and Beis Hillel says you pay only 1. Because the value of the gazela was the value when it left the hands of the owner, not when it was destroyed. So sure, it appreciated in value later on, but that's not on the Goslin. It's not on the Shomer. In other words, the Shomer got it was worth 1, and then it left his hand, but it wasn't broken yet. So the machlokes of when gazela happens, that's the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So according to Beis Shammai, since we're talking about B'shas, when it was destroyed, he has to pay that valuation. And Beis Hillel says that he has to pay only when it was taken, even before destruction. So now we have to look at valuations. For some reason, it may be that the dollar amount between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not the same, but the underlying understanding of how we get to that dollar amount is the machlokes. So I'm not going to presuppose that the moment it was taken from the hands of the owner, it appreciated in value or not. We don't know that. We're going to evaluate that. But that's the marker. The bench marker is when did it leave the hands of the owner, even before it was destroyed. Beis Hillel says that means b'shas haitzah, and that's what he has to pay. But according to Beis Shammai, no, that wasn't gazela. Gazela is when he de jure actively drank or broke it. So therefore, now we have to look at the valuation when he did that. So that machlokes we can understand, because now we have a difference between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel is not saying, before we said, what's the chiddush between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? What chiddush did Beis Hillel give us? Now, you know what the chiddush is? The chiddush is that Beis Hillel is measuring it by the time it left the hands of the Baalim, and Beis Shammai is measuring at the time that it broke. So let me just say this next line, because this is an important punchline, then we'll talk. Zak the Gemara, Lema Rabba Dama Beis Shammai. If that's the case, then it turns out that Rabba, who gave us this case of wine in the Brisa, he'll hold like Beis Shammai. And that's not possible, because in the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So how can Rabba and Amora say that he says he quotes literally Beis Shammai, which means he holds like Beis Shammai? That's not possible. He can't hold like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel. That's not what the Amoraim do. The Amoraim follow Beis Hillel. So you understand that by making the machlokes, whether it was b'shas haitzah, whether it was at the time it left the hands of the owner or the time it broke, that puts Rabbah in a very, very compromising position, because he said that if it goes up in value, you pay 4. But according to Beis Hillel, there's a circumstance where it goes up in value and you only pay 1. When it was worth 1 when it left his possession, even though it was worth 4 when it broke. You understand? So now that puts Rabbah in a difficult position. Go ahead.
Well, why when the shomer gets the object, when the balabas who owns it and says, please watch it, there's no assumption here that the balabas thinks the value is going to go up or down. It is what it is. The fact that it can be returned as is says we don't care if the value of the item changed throughout. We're not going to watch it every hour, every day, and do an assessment of how much the value is today. He's basically responsible to return the object, whatever it is. It's an old lawnmower or something. The balabas never expected the value to change when he gave it to the shomer. Otherwise, he'd have to specify something. It's very hard to understand why Beis Shammai says, well, we're just going to not do it that way. We're going to start seeing at the end, it could have appreciated. But then that appreciation of Beis Shammai is meaningless, because the shomer can return the original lawnmower.
Except that it's no longer here.
just
the lawn
saying.
was voted.
But
Now,
whether it's here or not should not change whether or
but
not
the Gemara
you
says,
have
no,
to.
no, the Gemara says it does. Now, let's go back to Michael. Michael, you asked a question. Your question was, what happens if the owner asks the shomer to return it and the shomer does not return it? At that moment, what did I say to you? There's a gazela, right? In other words, he's misappropriating it. That's Beis Hillel. That's Beis Hillel Shita. Beis Hillel was saying the owner came to the shomer and says, please give it back to me. He doesn't give it back to me. Says Beis Hillel, that's misappropriation. That's gazela. What's it worth at that point? 1 zuz? Good. Now he goes ahead and drinks it. And at the time he drinks it or actually breaks it, it's worth 4 zuz. Beis Hillel says, so what? When he stole it, it was worth 1 zuz. When the owner asked him, please give it back to me, it was 1 zuz. That's all he has to give him. That's pshat hoitza'ah. The definition of hoitza'ah, Michael and everybody else, is when did he ask him? When he asked him and he didn't return it, that's gazela. Beis Shammai says, that's not gazela. Okay, he had it in his possession. That's not gazela. Now, because it's still intact, he can still give it back, Jay. And by giving it back, he's giving back the item regardless what it's worth. But once it's a davar shaloi bala olam, once it's no longer in the world because the lawnmower or the barrel broke, then he can't give him back that item. Then we go from item to value. We now shift our focus and we say, forget about the item. You can't give it back. What's it worth? Well, according to Beis Shammai, it's now worth 4 zuz. But according to Beis Hillel, it's still only worth 1 because when time he took it, it was 1, and that's the benchmark. Okay, the benchmark is when he took it. End of story. Anything after that, not relevant. So we have a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which we can actually see the machlokes. The problem is that Rabbah, who quotes in his brisa, is quoting Beis Shammai, which means that he holds that it has to be 4 zuz, not 1. And the Gemara inherently is asking, how can that be? How can Rabbah hold like Beis Shammai? Because we know that there's only very few exceptions. The halacha is like Beis Hillel. Rabbah should hold only 1 zuz, not 4. So that's the Gemara Shaila. Lema Rabbah dama Beis Shammai. Let's say that Rabbah holds like Beis Shammai, which is not appropriate. It's not right. So we have it. So again, so where we are here is we've discovered that the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is in the definition of haitzah. According to Beis Hillel, haitzah means the moment it leaves the possession of the balam, not leaves the world, so to speak. And Beis Shammai says, no, haitzah means when the barrel leaves the world. When the barrel leaves the world and is broken, and you broke it, that's the gazela. What's it worth? In our example, 4 zuz. Beis Hillel says, wait a minute. Haitzah doesn't mean that. Haitzah means when it left the possession of the owner. How much was it worth then? 1 zuz. So that's the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Even though it appreciated in price, Beis Hillel holds the line and said, you can't make the Goslin Chaya for something that he didn't misappropriate, because the Mishnah, again, we go by the Mishnah in Bava Kama that always says that the Goslin pays at the time of the Gazela. We have to define the time of the Gazela. According to Beis Hillel, we define the time of the Gazela as the moment it left the Baal's position. So again, this is, by the way, the standard is that Beis Hillel is Mekel and Beis Shammai is Machmir. So Beis Shammai is Machmir and says you have to pay how much? 4 zuz. Beis Hillel is Mekel and says you only have to pay 1 zuz, and that's where the argument seems to be.
But Rabbi, this is, going back and forth on this is, obviously it's a stark dichotomy, but you have to understand that, this is why I asked the question, because it's changing at that point. You're acting as a shomer chinam. If you do nothing but guard it, and something happens to it without your assistance or precipitation, then you're a shomer chinam, and the value, you can argue that the value is what it was, at the time it was given to you. When the person who gave it over may say at that time, I know it's worth more, I want it back. Or if the person drank it or used it, they may have even sold it. If they could sell it for 4 zuz and only pay 1, they've got an unforeseen profit, and it's thievery. So how can you not, like you said, delineate the point of Gezela and then establish that changes from that point forward?
Right. So your point is well taken, that according to Beis Hillel, this fella can actually make a profit and do a business because he's chayiv 1 zuz, and then he takes it,
Right.
and then he does something with it later, which profits him. But again, you're right. No, I'm not disputing. So according to Beis Hillel, that's one of the anomalies in his position, is that he can make a profit on his gezela. But fortunately, we're going to stop here. But fortunately, this is not the machlokes. Why is it not the machlokes? Because of Rabbah. This can't be the interpretation of Beis Hillel, because if that was Beis Hillel's interpretation, then Rabbah's holding like Beis Shammai, and that's not possible. So we're sort of saving the bell, we're saving the day by saying that can't be Beis Hillel. You're right. He would make a profit, and that's not fair, but it can't be the case, because then Rabbah comes out on the wrong side of this, and the whole thing blows up. So but basically, we're back to the drawing board. So next week, when we pick up, we're going to have to find another distinction between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But you make a good point, is that at that point, now, there's one question that wasn't asked, and let me just clarify. Because I said we're dealing with a shomer chinam. Nobody asked me, wait a minute, a shomer chinam is not chayiv in gezela. Sure, he's not chayiv in gezela if somebody else steals it. But if the shomer chinam steals it, of course he's chayiv in gezela. So, in other words, you all knew it. I knew you knew it. But the gezela here that a shomer chinam is pater from is gezela from Yenin, from somebody else, not his own gezela. Once he steals it, then all bets are off. He's culpable. Anyway,
So halacha l'maisa, what is the bright line distinction between shlichus yad and gezela? When exactly do you cross the line?
okay, so we're going to have to hold that, because that will be further elaborated as we go into the Gemara, because shlichus yad is a form of gezela, right?
Right.
But what is the distinction? So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because then we're going to open up a whole other good question. Keep that question in your head, because that question will again come up. What is the distinction, and why do we use, when we go further in the Gemara? So the Gemara will give that answer when we go further and discuss the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, because we're not finished here. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, we still don't have a machlokes. What is the machlokes? When is Haitzah according to Beis Hillel? Right? We don't know what it is. It's not with the time when it leaves the Balim, because that won't work. So we have to stop, and we have to say, okay, we're going to pick this up, and we're going to first continue to discover the machlokes between Shammai and Beis Hillel, and then all these other questions will fall into line. We'll begin to understand gezela, shlichus yad, because there's more to it than we're seeing. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Ah.
Thank you.
All right.